Good evening and welcome to the Second Tuesday Photo Huddle. This month we want to venture into the night with Robyn Porteen. I'll let Robyn introduce herself and then we'll get going.
So just a real quick little bit about me. Been a photographer for a few years. I became obsessed with the night sky about 6 years ago. It's just part of my meditation to get outside at night and see the universe. I'm dedicated part of my life to that. So I'm a delegate now to the International Dark Sky Association. I have a global network of other dark sky advocates that I meet with every month, and a co-founder of Women in Astrophotography. So it's a global network of women astrophotographers because a lot of us are scared of the dark, so we can network and meet up with women in other parts of the world and go out and shoot together. I'm also founder of West Michigan Night Photographer Meetup Group. It's been a little still this year because of COVID, but next year I hope to get some more meetings together and plan some trips to some state parks in Michigan. And I also own Porteen gear. I make custom camera bags and travel gear. And if anybody wants a copy of this PDF and we're done, I got an email address here at the bottom, or you can get a hold of Mike and he'll give you my contact information. So we're going to do 3 sections. We're going to do single shot images of the sky, simple, basic, just what you would need to go out and photograph the Milky Way, constellations, the moon. Then we're going to talk about compositing images, how you take a separate exposure for the foreground and then an exposure sky. And then we'll talk about light painting along with that, and time lapse and star trails. So we can do questions after each section if anybody has any feedback, if they want to share how they maybe would do things differently or have a question, we can do them after each section. So, and I do want to throw out a disclaimer that there's plenty of ways to photograph the night sky and use post-processing techniques. I'm just going to share with you how I do things. I'm self-taught, so my way is not the only way. So we'll start with the single images of the night sky. So you can get out there with just a basic tripod, a good camera, full frame or mirrorless. I know a lot of people say full frame's the only way to go. I traded all my Canon gear in for mirrorless 3 years ago, and my little Fuji X T3 does a really good job. So when you go out, you'll need a sturdy tripod, a camera with manual settings, a good fast aperture wide angle lens, a location away from light pollution with an interesting foreground. Light pollution can add interest, you know, if you like that orange glow at the bottom of the photo. Just get a little bit away from Grand Rapids or you won't get to see the night sky as good. And always shoot raw for your shots so you have a chance to adjust sharpness, exposure, white balance, post-processing. Another general rule is to keep your exposure time under 30 seconds or your stars are going to start going oblong. So figure out what your camera is capable of with the settings to try to keep that exposure under 30 seconds. ISO settings can go higher on some of the newer cameras. I'm usually at 3200 or 6400 if it's really dark, and still does a pretty good job. Experiment with your white balance. Between 3000 and 4000 K is a good target, you know, for the night sky, but it's a matter of preference. I use a red intensifier light pollution filter because I like my skies to look a little bluer. And it kind of gets rid of some of the light pollution that can be on the horizon. There's just lots of interest, but picking a good foreground, I think, is what's going to give your shot the more pizzazz. So if you just photograph the stars without any foreground, you're going to get bored with that after 2 or 3 outings. So I'm always scouting for interesting images. I love middle of the road shots, old buildings, tree lines, power lines, lakes and ponds, because you can get a really good reflection on your stars. And if you're pointing north, there's always usually air glow certain times a year. You can see on this bottom photo, I got a little green, blue, and red. That's all air glow. There was nothing north of where I was here.
So what you're saying, Robyn, is just because it's dark out, composition still matters, right?
It does, yeah. It's you can look at it as landscape photography, just toned down, and you can do it at night. So it's same composition. The photo on the bottom is not in my opinion, good composition, but I just wanted to kind of show a sample of air glow off in the distance to add interest to the sky. I think I got one more here. This is the International Dark Sky Park up in the Headlands up by the Mackinac Bridge. So you get a little bit of light reflection or lake reflection with the stars on this one. A lot of light pollution. I think they designated that as an International Dark Sky Park because of the darkness straight up, you know, for deep space photography. But it's still a really cool place to go. And you can get some great shots of the Milky Way. The lens that I use is a 12mm wide angle because I don't have a full frame camera. That puts me, I think, at about 18. And I've got my camera settings under some of this, but this Milky Way was shot at 25 seconds at f2.0. So we'll stop with the single images. The other two sections are a little more complex, but does anybody have any questions or any feedback or anything that they like to go out and shoot?
How about locations, or are you going to talk about that later? Just some quick strike distances within West Michigan. Follow up to that is out by the Thumb, Port Crescent, it seems to have a dark sky area too.
Yes, we have 2 dark sky reserves out by the Thumb of Michigan. Rockport State Park is one of them, but yeah, there's a lot of good dark skies. As far as away from Grand Rapids, that's a little tough. There are some state lands. There's one up by Newaygo off of M82. It's between Newaygo and 131. There's a natural prairie there that is really beautiful. It's wide open. You got a 360-degree view of the sky. The only downfall is you're driving down the power lines, so you got to have a 4-wheel drive to get back in there. I've gone to Fisk Knob, which is north of Cedar Springs. It's the highest elevation in Kent County. It says closed at dusk, but a lot of photographers will walk up in there, you know, and do some photography. You'll get some light pollution.
So
otherwise, you got to head up further north, the Headlands, Mackinac Bridge area, and then Alpena, like I said, is a really good location.
So they should look at your meetup group to get more details on those kind of assets, right?
Yep. So with my
right.
meetup group, what I'm going to do is I'm going to book some campgrounds till next year, and I'm going to head out to some state parks and just do a open invite if anybody wants to come up on those dates. There's one really great park up in the UP on the southern shore called Frankfurt. I think it's Frankfurt State Park. They got the old town buildings in there, old farmhouses that they're keeping up, but the old weathered wood. So I'm going to be making a trip up there, probably after black fly season at the UP.
All right, I will put your meetup group in the chat comments too.
Okay. Now, in case anybody doesn't know, if the chat, you can save the chat before we close out the meeting.
Right,
just
and
by
I am
saving
recording.
it. Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on then to composite. I call it a composite. It's taking 2 exposures to blend together the sky and the foreground. A lot of people like just the silhouettes. They'll pick out buildings for that purpose. I like to do 2 exposures. This waterfall I just shot in Blackwater Falls, West Virginia about a month ago. The bottom part of this photo was an 8-minute exposure. And then the sky was a single exposure. I think it was about 25 seconds. And then I blend them together, which is quite common if you really want to showcase a foreground to do a longer exposure. You can also light paint that. In fact, I think this image did have a little bit of light painting on that waterfall as well. It's pretty easy to blend together if you've got the right backdrop. If it's trees, I usually just bring it into Photoshop and do a layer for each one, the foreground and the background, and I'll take a very soft brush and blend the tree line in. And then easy as that, I've got my double exposure image. A lot of people will stack the sky. I don't know if you guys know what star stacking is, but you'll do 10 to 15 shots of the night sky, same exposure, and you can stack those together. There's a lot of free apps and software that will do that for you, and it'll eliminate the noise in the background. It'll make your stars sharper and just give you a really good overall image. And with the star stacking, it takes out plane trails, contrails, and stuff too. So it's looking for all the stars, the things that are in the same place, and it eliminates everything that's not. So digital noise can be different on each frame, so it does a really good job at getting rid of the noise. So this is one example. Here's where I broke it down, my exposure for the sky and my exposure for the waterfall. So you can see the stars trailing in the image on the right because it was an 8-minute exposure. That one did not have any light painting. That was my straight 8-minute exposure. And then I did 25 seconds to get the stars. And then because they were raw, I could adjust and pop the stars out a little bit in my native raw software. This is another one. I took 2-minute exposure. There were some rocks in the foreground here that I wanted to catch. So I did a 2-minute exposure to get the rocks lit. They were being lit by the light pollution and the brightness of the stars. And I merged those two images together to get this. So it just adds a little bit more dimension. I would never add something that wasn't there. This is taking 2 images with the same exact tripod camera placement and just merging them together. It's kind of maybe similar to HDR, and star stacking, I kind of explained this already. So I think we'll go into the more difficult, challenging one after this, but does anybody have any questions on doing 2 images to get the foreground in the sky?
Tom Harrington had asked, do you zoom in on the moon or zoom on the moon? So I'm presuming he's talking about imaging and not actually conducting Zoom meetings on the moon. Is that right, Tom? Do you do lunar photography, Robyn?
I do. Yes, I do. I usually use a telescope for that. I've been obsessed with the moon this year, so I've done a lot of really close-ups. But I'll always run out there and do a moonrise, moonset, especially if it's one of the super moons. I try to pick my landscapes. I live on the north side of Grand Rapids, so I've got Peach Ridge, Fruit Ridge, all of these places out here with the barns and the orchards and stuff that I can like to run out and do moon photography. So I do have the moon behind me. Probably can't see it. It's faded in the distance, but that's a double image shot where I shot a crescent moon and then a full moon and merged them together. So it's a 3-dimensional image with the stars behind of the moon. Anybody else? Has anybody else gone out and done any night photography this year? Or done any image stacking?
You should be able to unmute yourself if you want to go for a direct question.
Yep, you can hold the space bar down. So if anybody has questions, if you hold your space bar down, your mute will go away, or unmute yourself. All right, I'm going to move on with some examples of star trails and time lapse. This is another thing you can do at night that's kind of fun. Grab a lawn chair, hang out, and let your camera do all the work. This image was taken up near the observatory that I belong to on the property. It's a centennial farm. This was, I think, like 420 images. So you set your camera up on a tripod to take multiple shots. You can use an intervalometer or in-camera settings. It can take up to 2 or 3 hours depending on the amount of trailing that you want. But the first thing you'll need to do to get a good round star trails image is to locate the North Star or Polaris to plan your shoot. But when you're doing this, you're actually taking a photo of the rotation of the Earth. It's kind of cool. A Polaris wobbles a bit, so you can kind of picture the planet on a skewer wobbling around. So out of all the images, I still picked my favorite foreground shot and brought the barn in on one because I had cars going by. I had images where I was walking up with my headlamp to check on exposures. So I separated out my favorite foreground shot and then kept the star trails behind that. It takes a lot of post-processing, but there are some free apps like StarStax where you can drop all your images in and it will automatically pop out your star trails image. You can make a time-lapse movie of the stars going in a circle. One of the downfalls is you still have to process all those raw images and turn them into TIFFs for StarStax, which takes a lot of time. And if you don't know Photoshop well, it can eat up a lot of memory. I usually write in action and just put it on the folder and all my images will go. It's the only time I shoot JPEG because I don't want all those high resolution images to grind my computer down. And the end result, the barn will be one of my raw images. I usually will do a image of just the barn as a standard shot or the foreground and then pop in the sky as a star trail. I don't know if anybody else is shooting all of those in RAW, but it would eat up a lot of memory. There's other apps you can use like Sequator. It'll stack your images to get crisp stars. So basically this was ISO 3200, 20-second exposures. I think I had a 2-second gap in between and it was 2 to 3 hours because I wanted the really long trails. Does anybody else done any star trails this year?
One of the things I've run into with star trails is that you get the gaps in the trails themselves, and I'm usually using a 1 second space in between. Is there any way to actually get those combined and get a nice smooth curve showing?
Well, I know in the app Star Stacks, it'll do that for you. You can tell it to fill gaps. Otherwise, depending on your camera and how fast it processes an image, you know, if you can under a second, I don't know if you can or not. You might bog down your camera as it's processing all the images after it takes each shot. But no, I use Star Stacks for everything, and you can put in there fill gaps, and it'll actually fill them for you.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
And one other thing I've done is shoot pointing east or west, and then you get what kind of looks like wagon wheel tracks, you know, on either side of you. You imagine you're looking, you know, into where the Earth is rotating towards, and you get some really neat images that way.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I haven't tried that one yet. Fairly new to the star trails. I've done a lot of time lapse, but this was one of my first star trails. But yeah, no, that's a great idea. You get more of an arc in the sky. Okay, well, we'll go on to light painting. So light painting is also a good way if you want to do a single image and you don't want to have Photoshop, or you don't want to have to merge. You can light paint your foreground. In the picture here, you can see him on the left. There's a guy in our group. We were all in West Virginia together on a group shoot. He went down with a Lume Cube, and a Lume Cube is a little LED panel. Sell a lot of those for Zoom meetings, so you can light yourself and look pretty on the Zoom meetings. But the bigger one is really actually good for light painting because it has a diffuser that you can use, and it doesn't have harsh light like a flashlight, and you can just sweep it over a scene. So he had done that while we were all shooting, lighting that waterfall in different ways. So there's ways to get that single image. A lot of people like to do single image photography. Here's another example of light painting. We had a tower out there. So, you know, the one's a silhouette, but just turning a flashlight on and off on this one, you can tell it's flashlight's incandescent light, just gave enough interest to show some dimension in that tower. You know, I've done old abandoned houses. I'll do just a quick flash of light, and it takes some practice because if you're doing a landscape and you got a foreground with grass and tall weeds, you know, you've got to not let that light hit what's closest to the camera. So I've used snoots where I put like a paper towel roll over my flashlight to control the light beam and actually light paint in, you know, some of the eaves of the buildings. Sometimes I'll do the trees. And so there's just a couple examples of light painting. Okay. Okay. Well, just beyond this is just tips. I know that we only had 40 minutes, so I could go really in depth on some of those other things, maybe another time, but basically just wanted to give some apps that would be helpful, other things you can carry in your night photography bags. So always bring a flashlight. Headlamp with a red light is good. It can take up to 20 minutes for your eyes to adjust to the dark. So you don't want to blow out your eyeballs by turning a flashlight on. Lens dew heater and hand warmers are great if you've got a lot of moisture in the air and your lens fogs up. You know, the camera gets hot and the air is colder, you're going to get fog. Bug repellent, chair for long exposures, a remote shutter, lots of batteries or a battery grip, or for sure a battery grip if you're doing 2 or 3 hours of shooting. And then to pre-plan your trip, apps that I use that can be helpful. Photo Pills is a really good one. It's a little bit of a learning curve, but you can pre-plan, you can go out and do a recon, and actually it'll show you, you know, 2 nights from then where the Milky Way will be. You can overlay that, hold your phone up and see, you know, maybe what building you'd want to put right under the Milky Way or when it's going to be in the middle of the road. Sky Guide is one that I use. It can help me identify what I'm looking at. Constellations is really quick at finding the North Star. Weather, of course, a lot of weather apps will have cloud cover, so you can see if there's anything coming off the lake shore. It's going to ruin your shot in a half hour. Moon phase, I use that one a lot to see where the moon will rise and set to pre-plan my shoot. I'm always knowing when the new moon is. That's when I try to go out. But sometimes you can get really dark skies if that moon's out there during the day and it sets at 6 p.m. So it's always good to maybe check that. A light pollution map. That's the name of the app. It'll help you see how far away you need to be from a city or town to avoid light pollution. Kind of shows you how it covers the area. And Aurora is good if you're into doing the northern lights. They give a 2 to 3 day warning sometimes, and when the flares are coming. I haven't seen many down here, but if you know you're free, you have a lot of freedom, you can run up to the UP and get on Lake Superior for that. And then other tips. And this image is another example where I did a long exposure for the bottom and a regular for the top, and that's the light pollution from Grand Rapids. I'm up in Newaygo there. Always try to do a recon before you go out at night, so you know the road conditions, you know unsafe areas on footpaths. You can pre-plan foregrounds. We all went to Alpena last year. I went out during the day because it was all gravel pits, and where we all wanted to go shoot, if you'd have walked 10 foot forward, you'd have fallen down the gravel pile about 50 feet. So it's good to know what's out there before you go out at night. Another thing that I always do is I figure out how to black out the lights in my vehicle. You don't want to open a car door and have all the lights blast out. You know, that light travels quite a ways, even if your camera's not by your car, and it'll ruin your shot. It'll also blind you if your eyes are adjusted to the dark. Most vehicles have those options in the settings to turn off the interior lights. My Jeep still has a couple lights that come on when I open a door. So I've made panels to cover my dash, just cut black poster board or foam board, and I just lay it up on my dash. So I don't have to worry about losing my night vision. And then some of these are just common sense. Always leave the areas you found it. A lot of parks, you know, don't like us out there at night. I know a lot of parks out west, you know, are starting to ban photographers coming in. So, you know, don't cut down branches, leave trash, move fixtures. Research your site online for hours and restrictions. If you're going to a park specifically, some of them don't allow people in after dark. I've actually called some of the park rangers and they're fine with it, even though it says close at dusk. Let's see, it's illegal to do light painting in some state parks, especially out west. So make sure you check the rules. And up here, know your hunting season dates, so you aren't stumbling into the view of a hunter's area at dawn or dusk. And then dark sky parks and reserves, always make sure you turn your headlights off when entering parking areas. Use red headlamps to walk in, and don't do light painting or use flashlights. Those places are going to have photographers that are really serious about what they're doing. That's basically, I think, all I got.
Now it's time for questions, I think. If you were just getting ready to go out on your own, folks, what would you like doing? I've got one that says somebody likes to do pinhole star trails, moon flares.
I did have one more page, and just to
Well,
give ideas of what else you can do. You know, don't just go out when there's a new moon. Full moon landscape photography can be stunning. I got some little shots here, but this is my mannequin in a rowboat. You know, just took her out to set the scene, but that was full moon. Meteor showers. You've got close-ups of the moon. You can go out with a telescope, and northern lights. So there's a lot to do. You know, actually, I love going out with full moon. I just took a couple umbrellas with me on this one and set them out there. And so, yeah, there's a lot to do out at night.
I've done some long exposure night photography with clouds.
Yeah.
So you can kind of go out. If it's a cloudy night, you might get something out of that too, because it's a lot of fun. So you just never, the chaos, you never know what you're going to get. I love that.
That's true. And you can do the time lapse with those too, get those clouds moving across.
Tom had asked, can you see northern lights in Michigan? And yes, I've seen them as far south as Wabasis Lake.
Now, can you go out at Wabasis Lake at night? Is that open?
There is a county park. I did a short stint living on the south shore of the lake. The entire north side of the lake is unimproved, but there's a lot of farm fields out that way. So yes, northern lights are in Michigan, and depending on their strength, they can come down pretty far south. And
I think my challenge is, now that I've got a group of over 200 people in the West Michigan night photographers, is finding a place where we can all go. I mean, I know 200 people won't show up, but it's a challenge finding places to get out at night that aren't breaking trespassing laws or after hours. So that's been really tough. Oh, we got a great meteor shower in December. Geminids, try to get out and do that one.
Right.
It's going to be the best Geminids shower we've had in a long time. So December 13th, 14th, I think. You might even be able to get them in your backyard. Just point your camera up and take a lot of shots.
Is that similar to star photography, or what's kind of the difference between that?
Well, I usually just set my camera up to take multiple shots so I catch as many meteors as I can. And then I'll stack those images in Photoshop with a light and blending mode, and they'll all pop in. I just usually use my in-camera intervalometer and set it up to take a shot every minute, but there's going to be 80 an hour on that meteor shower. So if you just set up for 1 hour, you're going to catch a lot of stuff. I think it's between 11 p.m. and midnight. Maybe look at the NOAA site and they'll give you predictions for around here.
Thanks for stopping in. Hope you enjoyed your time and got something out of it. Remember, the Second Tuesday Photo Huddle is a part of the West Michigan Photography Enthusiast, which is sponsored by the Southwestern Michigan Council of Camera Clubs. Be sure to look for us at swmccc.org and look for your local camera club to get more involved. Robyn's group is called the West Michigan Night Photography Meetup Group. Obviously, it's on Meetup too.